160 something, 162, 163 in that range. 2 or 3. When we get there, I'll tell you what page we're on. I'm going to do some introductions of the stuff first. I'm experimenting without sunglasses to see what the rest of my day will be like after doing this. We'll see. If I'm sitting and my eyes are burning, it won't be without sunglasses again. Well, that's the problem. That's been the problem. I can see perfectly, but they burn, so I want to do this. Yeah. I can open my eyes. I can see you much better than I saw you before the cataract surgery.
Can you just have the glasses that just haven't rotated there?
Press a little button? Yes, indeed. So this is an experiment. You're all part of it. If I crumble to the floor at any point, you'll know what happened. That's not going to happen. Okay. So we've gone through, in terms of the Amidah, the first 3 blessings. The blessing of God in history, the blessing of God in nature, and then sort of the ineffable, the God of spirituality, of sort of the Hasidic world, the mystic world. We then come to, on the weekdays, before we get to Shabbat, on the weekdays, what you'll find in this text, these middle blessings are all petitionary. They all are saying, we need. So what we've done in the weekdays, we've said, God, you're wonderful, you're terrific, you're great, you love your tie. We then say, God, oh, by the way, I need A, B, C, D, E. And then at the end is a section on thank you. The first part, as I've said before, the first part of praising God and the last section of thanking God are the same with some minor modifications no matter what happens during the course of the year. It's the same on Rosh Hashanah, it's the same on Shabbat, it's the same all throughout the year. What really distinguishes one day from another is what happens between. So on Rosh Hashanah we have Malchuyot, Zichronot, Shofarot. Okay? We all recognize it's sort of a different theme. On the weekdays, we have these petitions. One of the things I want to just talk about very briefly in terms of kinds of petitions. One of the things we have to recognize sometimes, unfortunately, God's answer is no. We may not like that or et cetera, but what you can't turn God into is a vending machine. Put it in a prayer and get your prize. Sometimes the answer is no, we don't know why. All right? And so that's the distinction between magic and prayer. Magic, by definition, has to produce an outcome. Prayer may get you an outcome that you don't like. All right, so let's look at Shabbat. That's where we're talking. That's really our where we've gone in this course. The Shabbat Amidah is shorter by definition. You don't have those 13 blessings of request. The first 3 and the last 3 are the same. In between, however, there is one blessing. There is one blessing about Mikadesh HaShabbat, who sanctifies the Shabbat. That's the theme that is there. It is considered inappropriate on Shabbat to make any requests of God. This is not a time to put your requests in. Even when you make a Mishnah Baruch for someone who is ill, you are not asking God to heal them. What you're doing is saying, I hope, God, that this is your intention. Okay, it's sort of a roundabout way of asking without asking. But it's not really a request for healing. It's a statement of you, God, heal. By the way, I hope this is what you have in mind. Exactly. And so if you turn to 163, 163. I have the big book because I'm blind. All right. The blessing that is the middle section, or the one blessing of Shabbat, goes from the top of 163. Although it basically goes through the top of 163. Wait a minute, where's the? Oh, no, I'm sorry, 162. 162, where it says all services continue here. It goes from that point to the middle of 163. There's 4 paragraphs all in total that all are one long blessing. Okay? So let's take them apart. Let's look at the 4 paragraphs. That's what I want to start with. Okay, 162. Yismach Moshe. Moses rejoices in his portion. Ki Eved Ne'eman, because he was a faithful Eved. That could be a slave or a servant. Okay? Ki Eved Ne'eman karatalo. He was called a faithful servant. All right? You adorned his head with a brilliant crown when he stood before you on Mount Sinai. He carried down the 2 tablets of stone inscribed with the instructions to observe Shabbat. In other words, he brings down the 2 tablets, and the 4th commandment is what? Shabbat. It's introducing this whole concept. Where does it come from? Moses standing on the mountain, the servant of God, standing on the mountain, getting the tablets, brings it down, and then it says, they broke it up, but the next is, as it is written in your Torah. That's where the paragraph ends. Right? Let's look at this for a section. So you've got Moses as a faithful servant. And I really want to play on this word Eved, because when we talk about it, oftentimes the Bible is described with slavery. And it's ambiguous. It's ambiguous because the word for slave is also the word for servant. All right? What does it mean? Does the Bible actually endorse slavery as we understand it? Or does it really describe more of an indentured servitude in many cases? Think of the following. In a world without insurance, which is most of history, all right, someone comes into Steve's house, picking on Steve. They steal his stuff. And then they're caught. Right, he shot the guy, right. All right. Let's just, again, we're not talking modern times. There are no guns. You don't get a gun in the ancient world. Okay? All right. And so they take his stuff. The guy is found. He's gotten rid of all the stuff already. And they put him in jail. Okay, so he's been punished, right? What about Steve? Where's all your stuff? You're now out. At the end of the day, you're the one who lost. You didn't do anything. So in today's world, you file the insurance. You get money back. They didn't have insurance. And so what they did is, instead of jail, they said, this guy's going to work for Steve for the next 7 years and pay off his debt. So at least you're getting something in response to your loss. You don't, but he works, and in other words, they were farmers. So he worked in the field. The result of his work paid off his debt. So the answer is yes, but the Bible's response is, if you steal something, you have to pay back 4 times. In other words, they really wanted to discourage this behavior. So if you steal $1,000 worth of stuff, you now owe Steve $4,000. Steve wins. Okay? What's that? He's got his bow and arrow.
You adorned his head with a brilliant crown.
Right.
I kind of stuck on that.
Why?
That, to me, that is kind of symbolic of maybe idolatry, or
But
something.
the word, it's a crown of glory. It is meant really as like the symbolic light. All right? It's like it describes in Moses when he descends the mountain. It's like he's glowing. And from that point on, he wears a veil for the rest of his life. No one ever sees his face again. There's all sorts of theories that it's a different Moses who comes down the mountain and went up. And he doesn't want anybody to know. Right? Wait, the Bible doesn't give us this information, so what do? They write midrashim. They fill in the details that you don't know. Okay? But it's not a crown in the sense of a crown that a king would wear. Okay? It's also astounding to find in the middle of our prayers, very rarely is a person mentioned. All right? And here you've got Moses' name highlighted. But what does it do with that? It goes out of his way. The prayer book goes out of its way to say he was just a servant of God. Don't add any divinity to Moses. Don't add anything more than that to Moses. We're mentioning him because he was God's servant and he led us out of Egypt. But it goes out of his way to downplay Moses as no level of divinity there. All right? Let's read the next paragraph. It says about two-thirds of the way down. The people Israel shall observe Shabbat. By the way, this is right out of the Bible. This is right out of, I think it's Exodus. Right out of the Bible. The people shall observe Shabbat v'shamru v'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat, lasod et ha-Shabbat, to maintain it as an everlasting covenant throughout all generations. The Shabbat serves as a sign of the covenant. It is a sign between me and the people of Israel for all time. So as I said, this is from the Bible. This is God speaking. That in 6 days Adonai made the heavens and the earth, and on the seventh day ceased from work and rested. Okay. We all sing this. Vishamru v'nei Yisrael, right? But there's actually, it's a biblical verse. All right, so what's going on here? Now let's go back. I want to go back to the last two lines of the paragraph above. He carried down 2 tablets of stone, inscribed with the instructions to observe Shabbat, and it is written in your Torah. What would you expect to come next? The 4th commandment. Wouldn't you? That's what's just been described. And yet it doesn't. It's very likely that originally it did. It is very likely that originally in this prayer, the next thing that you read was Zachor Yom HaShabbat L'Kodsho, all right, and I'm going on, reading the 4th commandment. At a later point, the rabbis had a struggle. They lived, Marvin, you remind me of me with the sun, doing this. All right, they're living in a society that is saying, among the Christian times, all that matters is the 10 commandments. Get rid of the rest of that. It's all been dismissed by Jesus. And the rabbis say we need to fight back polemically. We need to let them know that's not the case. The 10 commandments are not the be-all and end-all. There's 613. And so what they did was remove that passage and replace it with another passage from the Bible that also talks about Shabbat. There's 10 of them. Vayechulu is another one. And they picked Vishamru and said, this is going to replace the 10 commandments to communicate the message that we're not all about the 10 commandments, we're all about the 613 commandments. And so this replaced the 4th. And when I say it, we're talking back in rabbinic times. This has been the way it's been for 2,000 years. This is not Mark Levine making an innovation in the Siddur. Okay? We also have here a description. It says it is a sign between me and the people of Israel for all time. It's an oath. Shabbat serves as a sign, as an oath, as a reminder of the covenant. Tefillin are also described as an oath, as a sign. Since you only need one reminder each day, the rabbis determined, on Shabbat, tefillin is not worn. Shabbat replaces it. Shabbat is a replacement for tefillin. Both are considered an oath. You only need one. So we wear tefillin 6 days of the week. On Shabbat, there's no need. Again, not modern rabbis. We're talking about, this is Talmudic. Go ahead. But work, the word work doesn't mean in English. When we say you're not allowed to work, it doesn't mean physical exertion. All right, when you talk about malacha, work, you're talking about things that change the status of nature. I can move the furniture, but I can move my furniture all over my house if I want to. There's nothing wrong with it. I can't carry a piece of paper out of the house. I can't water my lawn. I can carry furniture in the house, but I can't water my lawn. Because the water, well, the earth enables someone, that's carrying. But by watering the lawn, I'm causing change in nature. I'm causing growth. Nature is changing.
But I understand that when you pack the land on your farm,
Mm-hmm.
you are changing the flow of blood for that period of time.
Well, I get that. So look, I understand what you're saying, and it's not that I can tell you, well, that's just not right. I can't say that. But at the same time, I would say to you, we're allowed to cook. Not cook, we're allowed to reheat. We're allowed to do all sorts of other things. You take pills that change your blood flow, right? I don't think, and this is me speaking, I don't think that's what the rabbis had in mind. They actually list out 39 chief labors that are forbidden under this create their mindset. Right, they wanted to set it aside. Yeah, that probably was consistent with their thinking. I think that you've hit on something that would be more consistent with rabbinical thought. Yeah. A sign.
Does that mean that you could water the plants in your house?
No, because you're still causing them to grow. That in the house versus out of the house has to do with carrying. That's one specific law. But the real overlying issue is not. So, for example, when I was at camp, if you go to an Orthodox camp, they won't allow the kids to go swimming on Shabbat. Why not? Because when you get out of the pool, if you drip on the grass, you are literally changing the status of nature. Okay? It's not about the swimming. It is about what happens with dripping on the grass, that potential. All right? So you can swim. Swimming's an exertion. Swimming can be hard work. That's not the issue. Okay? It's changing of nature. That's the prevailing concept that underlies all of Shabbat observance. Leave the end of the 6 days, God stops doing anything to the world, nothing changes, and so that's our role to do, to emulate. We also stop anything that might cause creation. By the way, anything you can't do, you can't undo. So if you're not allowed to tie a knot, which changes things, you're not allowed to untie a knot. So your shoes. Right, so on Shabbat, people tend to wear loafers. You can't carry it out of the domain, right? So within an eruv or within an enclosed, you can carry any. That's why you put up an eruv, so you can carry things around. So within a designated domain, okay?
But how is that, how is that changing nature if you carry a purse outside of your home? I don't.
Then obviously it's not biblical, it's rabbinic. All right, I don't have the answer for that, the why on it. I bet if we sat and on some sociological level, we could figure out how they got there, but I don't know off the top of my head. Okay, so let me just see where we left off. Okay, the oat. So our job, in a sense, is to imitate this whole concept of God resting. All right, of not creating any more. And it's based on in the Exodus version of the Ten Commandments, it says, why do we do this? Because God rested on the seventh day. Did he need to rest? Maybe he was doing it because he was setting the example. Who knows? All right. You know as much about God as I do in terms of. No. Right. Nobody knows anything about God, is my point. We do our best. We struggle with it. Now, notice I said in the Exodus version, because there's a second version in Deuteronomy. And in Deuteronomy, it does not cite the creation as the reason for Shabbat. It cites the Exodus. That we have an obligation to God because God delivered us, and therefore that's why we do it. We remember. Okay? So there's two different versions. Then none of them, the essence is the same. Observe Shabbat. The essence on all the laws is the same. In the version in Exodus, it mentions who should rest. It's a limited list. In Deuteronomy, it includes such things as your slaves, your avadim, your servants, and your animals, etc. It doesn't say that in Exodus. Now, how do you explain that? Well, Moses is writing Deuteronomy. It's a review of what happened. And Moses embellishes a little bit. Well, either he forgot the specifics, right? So the version in Deuteronomy, there's a few things in Deuteronomy that are a little different. There's lots of ways to explain it. I'm sure an Orthodox Jew would come up with a different explanation. But it is Moses, the Deuteronomy is the second, Deutero is second. It is Moses reviewing, he's standing before the people at the end of his life, reviewing for them the journey that they've been on. That's what he's doing in Deuteronomy.
So he had the veil
When he can't, yeah, after he comes down Sinai, he has the veil. Part of it is they describe the shining from his face. He's encountered God, and people shouldn't look upon that. Right? You can write your own midrash on it. But at least one or two biblical scholars, and even within our movement, have suggested that the Moses who came down was not the Moses who went up. Yeah, right. If I meet God, I'll let you know. Probably means I'm dead, so I'm not going to let you know anything. All right. So Shabbat, in a sense, has also guarded Israel throughout history. Where we sort of take it in stride, in a world like in Europe, where they suffered greatly, and they literally stepped away from that suffering for a day. They created an island of calm in the middle of everything, as much as they could. And so Echad Ha'am, you probably have heard this before, his statement really says it all. He says, more than Israel has kept the Shabbat has kept Israel. Yeah. The problem is Echad Ha'am was a secularist, and sometimes his words are not embraced in religious settings. Yes.
In our family, we have one family who's very Orthodox, and when we visit with them in Baltimore, their observances are very meaningful, very loving. They even go to the part of, if there are toys that make noise, you have to take them away for Shabbos. But the fact that there's so much that they do to prepare for and observe in Shabbos, it's very beautiful. We hardly do it here.
Yeah. So if you remember the word kadosh, which is what we make kadesh HaShabbat, who sanctifies the Shabbat, means to separate, to distinguish. And so what they're doing is creating not just a house, but a whole mindset of difference from the normal routine. And each of us does that on our own levels. They're going a little further with it, and I'm sure there's somebody who's more Orthodox than them somewhere out there. There's always someone who's more frum. Okay? Always. The last thing I want to note is that in the Torah, right before this particular law on Shabbat, the Vishamru, right immediately before it is the commandment to construct the temple. The tabernacle. Right? So this follows the commandments of constructing the tabernacle. How do the rabbis make the association between the two? First of all, the first thing they do is I mentioned to you the 39 chief labors. Any of the things that you had to do for constructing the tabernacle, those were forbidden. That's the first connection they make. This follows this, therefore there must be a connection. All right? The other is to say that if even for the construction of the temple, Shabbat takes precedence, then it takes precedence over all other intents of doing good. So, for example, you don't give charity on Shabbat. You don't go out and volunteer on Shabbat from the rabbinic level. Shabbat takes precedence even over other holy acts. Now, the distinction is if someone's going to die right before you, you can do what you need to do. But short of that, you don't. You know what? So you giving charity? Give twice as much the day before. Or the day after. Find a way to work around that. But on Shabbat, don't do it. Even the construction of the tabernacle, God's dwelling place, is forbidden on Shabbat. You are to make as many distinctions as possible.
So what you're saying is,
He runs in and does it.
But anything scheduled surgery
Right. That's correct.
should not be on Shabbat.
Perfectly said.
It's also,
And elective surgery.
that's right.
Any kind of elective surgery would not be done on Shabbat. Life-saving surgery is. Yes, all the holidays. Yep. Anything that's life-saving, the doctor runs in. Every doctor I know who does surgery is walking around with a beeper or something. On Shabbat, I know Ron Moses has one too, right? You know it's going to happen at some point. I'm not here to, all right, I'm not here to judge anybody's actions. I'm here to tell you what the tradition suggests. Nobody fulfills every law perfectly. Nobody.
You could say it that somebody like him over there, because you know him, he's saving someone's life.
Yeah, right. Look, I don't know the specifics of what he does, and I don't want to know because I don't want to I don't really want to sit in judgment of anybody else. I got enough problems in my own life. Right? You know, I got enough issues to deal with. Right? And I suspect I'm not alone. Okay. All right. So that's the second paragraph. The third paragraph is on top of 163. You'll see at the top it says some omit, but the tradition is that's brand new. You would not have found that in the older Siddurim, and I'll explain it in a second, but it says some omit the first three lines. But Adonai our God, you have not given it to the nations of the world, meaning Torah, nor our sovereign have you bestowed, meaning Shabbat, sorry, not Torah, Shabbat, nor have you bestowed it upon idol worshippers, nor do the uncircumcised find rest on this day. The uncircumcised are meant to be the Christians, okay? For with love you have given Shabbat to the people Israel, the descendants of Jacob whom you have chosen. So we got the prize. The people who sanctify the seventh day shall feel fulfilled, shall delight in your goodness, for you yourself were pleased with the seventh day and sanctified it. It is called the most beloved of days, a symbol of the work of creation. Zecher l'maaseh v'reshit, remember the creation. All right, that's the third paragraph. We're still in this one blessing. We haven't gotten to the blessing yet. This is the introduction to the blessing. Yeah.
When you say that the part that some omit wasn't an older Siddurim, the older conservative,
The most recent.
or just
It's been in every Siddur before that. Everyone, Orthodox, Reform, Conservative, and then in this prayer book, somehow they decided those three lines should be, some can omit. So let's look at the, yes. So let's look at the top right-hand column of 163, and you'll see where it says, but you have not given it. This explains why they're saying you can omit it, okay? These phrases and the sentences that follow do not appear in early Ashkenazic literature, meaning 900 and 1,000, not recent, early. They were probably added in the High Middle Ages due to the competition between Judaism and Christianity and the persecution in the time of the Crusades and after. A sharp distinction was thus drawn. We are the inheritors of God's wonderful gift Shabbat, but our persecutors do not participate in it with us in this special moment. Our situation today is quite different, and we welcome non-Jews to join us in celebrating Shabbat. As the prophet Isaiah declared, Judaism's gifts are not a secret treasure to be hoarded, but a divine blessing to be shared with all who would join in receiving them. This is my logic, all right? When I say this blessing on Shabbat, I go back to what was said in the Silverman Siddur, and I'll show you what I mean. Where it says here, nor do the uncircumcised, all right, the Arelim, nor do the Arelim find rest on this day. And in the Hebrew, the third line in the Hebrew, V'gambim nuchato, lo yishkenu, who is not resting? The Arelim, the uncircumcised. That was changed in the Silverman Siddur to the word Rishaim, the evil. In other words, it's no longer referring to Christians. Now it's to the evil. I'm much more comfortable with that. And so when I say this blessing on the bima, you'll always hear me say, not Arelim. I don't say that. I say Rishaim, even though that's what's written here. Silverman was, and Silverman Siddur was probably, well, it's 1946. I know for 46, it was right before Israel. All right. Why they went back in the conservative movement to the traditional text of Arelim, I don't know. So they put it back and then said, oh, by the way, it's problematic. Okay? I don't know. But I insist myself in not saying that because I don't believe that. And if the rabbis were empowered to make a change in the Silverman Siddur, I feel comfortable accepting it. It's not Levine creating it. All right?
Could it be that because the Christians purposely decided not to observe the Sabbath and have their own day of rest on Sunday, could it be that it's because the Christians purposely rejected?
It's possible. And each of us has given our own meaning to what, for us, the Shabbat is about creation. For Christians, the Sabbath on Sunday is about the rising of Jesus upon his death. For Muslims, it's Monday. It's Friday, which theoretically represents the last day of creation. The day human beings were created, day 6. All right. So we've each given new meaning to it. All I can tell you, look, I'm going to accept the rabbinic scholarship that's listed here as the reason, but I'm also going to say to you, there's usually more than one reason for anything that happens. So no, you're not necessarily wrong. Okay? That's the third paragraph. The third paragraph is very particularistic. In other words, it's about Jews. It's not about the broader world. This paragraph in particular is about Jews. They don't have it. We do. They have a Sabbath. We have Shabbat. All right. We then get to the paragraph that actually talks about the blessing. And that is, the third paragraph here where it says, our God and God of our ancestors, Eloheinu ve'Elohei avotenu. Embrace our rest. Make us holy through your mitzvot, your commandments, and let the Torah be our portion. Fill our lives with your goodness. Gladden us with your deliverance. Purify our hearts to serve you truly. Adonai, our God, lovingly and willingly grant that we inherit your holy Shabbat, and that the people of Israel who make your name holy may find rest on this day. Look down below in the red, and this is the blessing that concludes all 4 paragraphs. Here we finally get to the blessing. Baruch atah, praise or blessed, or we bend our knee before you, Adonai, who makes the Shabbat holy. Everything we've just said leads to that blessing. The blessing is what's critical. The stuff before it is nice. One long blessing. And so we're told to sanctify God through his commandments. Through observance of God's mitzvot, we become holy. We become separated from the things that are common and ordinary in our lives. We're setting aside this time. Again, it's all about our mindset. When we set this time aside, we become different. When you set aside a day for a wedding, we become different. It's a different day. Our whole mindsets are different. When you set a day aside for Shabbat, the same is true. That's the goal. Thoughts, questions? Mekadesh Shabbat. So you can do this now. Go home, pick whatever you want. Never try to take on everything at once. Pick one mitzvah of Shabbat and add it and see, does it work for you? Does it help you distinguish and set aside and create a mindset that's different from the days you have to work? By the way, the other half of the commandment in the Torah is Sheshet Yamim Taseh Melacha. 6 days you're going to work. I don't like that one. I do, but I don't like that one. All right. We then get to the 5th blessing, which starts, as you can see there, the restoration of Zion, Ritzei Adonai Eloheinu. From this point on, after we finish the blessing for Shabbat, remember I told you the last 3 blessings are always basically the same. They're all blessings of thanksgiving. All right? According to the Talmud, as we are depart, in a sense, we've kind of reached the apex Mikadesh Shabbat. We're now beginning the departing, and we are like the departing of servants who take leave from a king after getting a gift. And so this bracha was also already in existence by the time of the temple. According to the Mishnah, the priests recited it right after they did a sacrifice. This is the blessing, the fifth blessing, right after the sacrifice. Rambam explains how this works. Look at reading number 1. I am never going to get through what I thought I was going to get through. Okay, good. That's a good thing. It's always good to be over-prepared. God's greatest gift to man is the human intellect, which enables man to discern between good and bad. But lurking inside every human heart is a wild beast, the Yetzer Hara, waiting for man to let down his guard so that it can overwhelm him with animalistic desires. When man surrenders his superb mind to the animal impulse, he rejects the divine gift of the human mind. In truth, man should forfeit his life, for this should be a capital crime in truth. But God, in mercy, provides for a different means of atonement. The sinner designates an animal, brings it to the temple, where he leans on its head and declares, "My intellect failed to control my impulse, and I have behaved like a senseless beast, not a godly human being. When I sinned, I resembled this animal upon which I am now leaning. I will therefore slaughter the animal to symbolize that in the future I will overcome and slay the animal impulses within me." It's great. It's great. It's right out of the Mishnah. It is wonderful. And again, I want to suggest to you, I may have said this last time, but I really want to emphasize this. We think of animal sacrifice as an incredibly primitive behavior. Is that fair? At the same time, that's exactly what you all just did on Thursday. Right? Except you got rid of the part where you had to deal with the live animal. You went to HEB and bought an already killed animal, burned it in your oven like a sacrifice, and then ate it, which is what they did with the sacrifices. What we do is crueler. You don't even have to deal with the fact that it once walked around, because it grew in HEB. Well, they were lambs. They weren't lions. They were lambs, and they were right. You're probably correct. It may have been his hands. Who knows? But that's obviously the Mishnah is saying this, and temporally, it's close to the time. It's during this time of the sacrifices, or just post. So that there has to be some reality to what he's saying. I don't know how accurate, but he's clearly describing something that is not 2,000 years ago. It's 50 years ago. All right, so corresponding to that, we then say this blessing at the end of the Amidah in place of the sacrifices. So we're replacing prayer with sacrifices, and therefore the wording is changed from a request for a sacrifice to be acceptable to a request that our prayers be acceptable. And we say, accept Adonai, your people Israel, and their prayer. Utfilatam, and their prayer. All right, so we change the wording to reflect post-Mishnaic times. That's the reality. We no longer sacrifice animals. The Amidah in its whole is meant to be the replacement for a sacrifice. It replaces it, yes. But I want you to think about, what does sacrifice mean? Yeah, you're giving something up. In other words, whether you're giving up your time, you're giving up your heart, you're giving up your soul. In place of the animal, we are giving, it's meant to express that we are giving something up. Try telling that to the kids who want to play baseball. Yes, I understand what you're saying, but this was the attempt. But they were saying it's the equivalent of. You were next, and then I saw your hand. Yes. Yeah, it's right. So I would say to you, look, the giving up of your time is greater than any other value that you have. I mean, time is limited. We all die. Time is limited. So giving up your time is incredibly valuable. Right? It's not a big deal. Okay, so yes, so the question, and I'm going to repeat it because there's people online. So the question is, this whole concept with the sacrifice, also you have the idea of a Kohen. You have the idea of a Levy. You have an idea of the larger population of Israelites. The Kohen was the priest who actually did the sacrifices. The Levim are members of the same tribe, but they are they were descendants not of Moses or of Aaron, but they're still of the same tribe of Levi. And they were the servants of the Kohen. So they enabled, I think you think of, you have your president, you have his cabinet. Right, the cabinet makes sure he has everything he needs. Okay? The Levim were the cabinet. All right, to the Kohanim. And then there's the rest of it. Yeah, and that's temple times. And once the temple is destroyed, there's no longer sacrifices. So yes, that whole idea is very much connected to the temple. There's no role for a Kohen in today's world. No real practical role. There are restrictions, but there's no real role. In some synagogues, they get up and do the Yivarechecha Adonai v'yishmerecha, and the conservative movement, the Cantor does it instead. We'll talk about that in just a second because it's also part of the Amidah. Okay? But there's really no role post-synagogue. And that, as a result, because what the Mishnah is doing is saying the temple is gone. All of these different ways that we practice are gone. How do we continue Judaism in its absence? Their first major focus was to say Torah is the whole purpose. That the Torah is the whole purpose of everything. God foresaw that the temple would be destroyed and that the Torah would be the vehicle for continuing beyond. But there's a shift from temple to Torah. There is clearly a change in the way that people practice with the destruction of the temple. Have I answered your question? No. Yes. Okay. If not, talk to me afterwards. I'm happy to try again. All right. So the Talmud, reading number 2, the Talmud teaches this transfer from sacrifice to prayer. Reading number 2 says, the Holy One, blessed is he, desired the prayers of the righteous. Therefore, we first ask God to look favorably upon the people of Israel and to consider them righteous. When the people are righteous in the eyes of God, he will surely look favorably upon their prayers and desire them. Now, mind you, the Talmud is a couple hundred years after the Mishnah. The Mishnah anticipated that the temple would be rebuilt. 130 years later, they've had the Bar Kokhba revolution, everything, and things have gone astray. It's clear that not 70 years later, the temple is not going to be rebuilt like the first one. And so already by the time of the Talmud, the rabbis start to give a different message, and that is that prayer is replacing it fully. We recognize it's not coming back in the next couple hundred years, as it hasn't. We haven't rebuilt the temple. And then may the worship of your people, by the way, it always be acceptable to you. The Talmud, that's in the plural. It's the prayers of your people. It's not my prayer, your prayer. It's in the collective. That's why the prayers are all in the plural. The Talmud stresses the importance of tefillah b'tzibor, of prayer with a community. And it even suggests that if you can't make the minyan, and there's no Zoom, they didn't have Zoom, none of that, then you pray at the same time the minyan's going on in your own home. So in some way you feel part of the community. All right. That's prayer. We only gotten to blessing 5. I know we're not going to get to number 7, but let's at least try 6. 164. You have Modim Anachnu Lach. We thank you. Guess what the theme of this blessing is? Thanksgiving. There you go. It's perfect for the week. We got the right week. One of the basic virtues of Judaism has always been to appreciate, to be grateful, to say thank you. Thanksgiving is in essence is what it means to be a Jew. All right, even the title Jew, Yehudah, comes from the root word lehodot, to give thanks. It's likely the first sacrifices ever made by anyone in the world were given because they had new crops, they had rain, there was sunshine, whatever. They were appreciative of the fact they were going to survive. And so this attitude is essential to us. And we recognize that when we talk about God's help, sometimes we see it as nisim, as miracles and things that break the laws of nature. But Judaism says, stop that. Yes, do that. But that's far from insufficient. There's daily things going on in your life that we need to recognize God's hand in. We live in a world that is full of the things that we need, and we see the hand of God in that. There's a tendency to only recognize something as wonderful when we lose it. We lose it. I am far more grateful for my sight than I've ever been. Okay? Just that's the nature of the beast. All right? We focus rather on what's missing. We do downward comparisons. All right? If only I had what I don't know, Elon Musk has. If only I had what Bill Gates has. All right? If only. We rarely do the downward comparisons. We do the upward comparisons rather. We rarely do, you know what? I've got, how many TVs do you have in your house? 1. Okay, 1. All right. Well, that's one more than many. How many computers? And if you have a family, you may have 3 and 4 of them and whatever. How many iPads? Right? This is not of course. This is not an of course. There's billions of people in the world who wouldn't dream of having those, couldn't dream of having those things. And your job is to stop and say, yes, this is a gift from God. Stop. The Talmud says, right. Who is happy with his portion? Hasameach bechel ko, the one who is happy with what he has, who recognizes the gifts that he's already gotten. Right.
Whatever, but you're righteous because you're approaching me, you're basically acknowledging God.
You're acknowledging God and spending your life attempting to, look, there's always the ideal, and then there's us. Our goal, though, is to continually strive for that ideal. We're never going to get there, but continually strive for it. All right, I'm going to shift your question a little bit, and I'm going to say yes with a but. Okay? It's not instead of, it's in addition to. So the rabbis would suggest you have to read what's here. But the same rabbis say that if that's all you've done, you haven't really prayed. In the Amidah is where you do insert, not on Shabbat, but on weekdays, is where you insert your private requests, but not in place of, in addition to. A scholar was once asked, what is stealing? And he responded and said, a person steals when he or she enjoys the benefits of the earth without giving thanks to God. When you eat food and you don't say a blessing, that would be, in his opinion, that is theft. It's certainly unappreciative. Rabbi Akiva said, be not like those who honor their gods in prosperity and curse them in adversity. Don't be like that. In pleasure and in pain, give thanks. This is someone who's taken out to his death to be killed and is saying blessings. Even in the terrible times, stop and appreciate. I can't see for a month or whatever it is. You know what? The rest of my body is working. Wow. All right? Even in tough times, praise God. Rabbi Natan Tzvi Finkel advises students, reading number 3, make a daily practice of viewing the world as if you had just entered. This is Heschel, the same idea. Thankful of the endless, glorious gifts we enjoy. The sunshine, the air, nature, sight, smell, hearing, taste, and touch. Look at everything around you with a fresh perspective each day, and you will transform monotony into an exhilarating experience. This is Heschel's radical amazement. Walk around the world as if you're seeing everything for the very first time, like a child. And every time I think of this, I think of my nephew, the first time you took him to the beach, and suddenly the ground isn't firm. Wait a minute, why is it moving? All right? For a child, that's got to be like just a revelation. We take these things for granted. Walk around the world with that sense of, wow. And your whole attitude to life will be different. One more step. The Talmud in Baba Kama quotes the following. It says, although, and then I'll explain after I tell you, although the wine belongs to the host, we give thanks to the butler who serves it. So not only are we to give thanks to God, but to those who bring God to the table and enable us to live our lives. So our parents, our teachers, our friends, and anyone else who helps us who are doing godly work, we owe them thanks too, because they're doing it on behalf of God. So if you look in this section, you'll also find, makes a lot of sense. This is all about thank yous, the prayer for Hanukkah, and the prayer for Purim. There's an insertion saying, thank you, God, for delivering us. Right? Where would you put it? This is where you'd put it. It's all about that. All right? Also, when the priest would do these sacrifices and use these words, afterwards he'd use these words, he would bow. So when we say Modim Anachnu Lach, we bow. And at the end, when you get to the blessing at the end of this paragraph, which is, let's see, it's at the very bottom line. So it starts out Modim Anachnu Lach, and it finishes Baruch Atah Adonai, praise are you Adonai. Hatov Shimecha, your name be praised and exalted. Ulecha Na'el Lehodot, and to you we give thanks. I don't know what it says here. It says, your name is goodness and praise of you is fitting. Okay, that's lovely. It encapsulates the message. So we bow when we say Modim Anachnu Lach, and then at the end, we do Baruch Atah Adonai. You stand before you say God's name. Right? We're reenacting, again, it's the same concept. We're reenacting the experience of the priests. I want to finish up with Birkat HaKohanim. Next week we'll deal with the last blessing. I don't know how we're going to finish the course, but who cares? Let's just play. Turn to the next page. You probably have heard the words, Yivarechecha Adonai v'yishmerecha, Ya'er Adonai panav elecha v'chunecha, Yisa Adonai panav elecha v'yasem lecha shalom. Every Shabbat I chant that, everybody hugs, and it's great. What we're doing is saying, may Adonai bless and protect you. May Adonai's countenance, his presence shine upon you. May Adonai bestow kindness upon you. May Adonai's countenance be lifted towards you, and may Adonai grant you peace. when we conclude, when we finish the sixth blessing, we haven't gotten to the seventh. In between the two blessings, before Sim Shalom, there is this insertion. The temple, in the temple, the priests recited this at the end of their sacrifice. The cantor or the Kohanim who stand there, all right, recite this blessing as a vestige of that temple service. Again, we're always recreating, always reliving. That's what we're doing. All right? But it's important to note that it is not the priest, it is not the cantor who is blessing you. They are the vehicles of God's blessing. It is God who is giving the blessing, and simply, I'm saying the words. Okay? I do not have the power to bless anyone, nor does anybody else. Rashbam teaches, we learn that when a person invokes a blessing upon another, he must not do so in his own name, but in the name of God. And listen to this. This is going to be new for you. All right? One should not say, you meet somebody who's not healthy, you don't say, I hope you have a complete recovery. You say, I hope God grants you a complete recovery. I'm not the one who can extend any kind of blessing. It's God's blessing. These three lines are offered most, this is the blessing offered most in Jewish life. It is possibly the blessing that's offered most in the Western world. And we know that the late Nelson Gluck, who was then president of UHC, the Reform Movement, offered it at the presidential inauguration of John Kennedy. All right. This text is floating out there. We use it on so many ways. It's extending God's blessing to those around. Yeah, to a lesser, yes, but I mean, we understand it's probably not, everything is degree. Yes. Yes, I think that's fair. All right, I'm going to leave there, but I just want to note, the last one is, may God grant you peace, right? It's leading into the next blessing of Sim Shalom. And that's where I'll pick up next time. We meet, well, okay. We meet in 2 weeks. Next week I have a bar mitzvah workshop, so we're meeting again on the 15th. Today's the 1st? Yeah, on the 15th. Yeah, when Chazan Krohn, David does it for the holidays. It's actually one of my favorites. When we had the synagogue had my 10th anniversary celebration, it's what I asked David to sing. Wait, she's talking first. And then I'll come to you. Yeah. Yeah, right. Yes, I'm sorry. Try again. Yeah.
Oh, yes. When my mother was still living, she loved Shabbat. And when we were reading the first part, she said, the week is gone, Shabbos is here, I'm ready to unplug, unwind.
Mm-hmm.
And that's exactly how we all felt about it. And I agree with her that we're busy during the week with everything, no matter what. But Shabbos is, like she said, her time, and I guess our time to just sort of unplug and unwind and just.
So let me just suggest that, ideally, no matter your political perspective, if you can turn the news off for a day, it's very calming.
Anyhow, this was really interesting.
Just calming. Somebody's doing something that'll annoy you. It doesn't matter what, so don't read it. Thank you all. Have a wonderful week. I hope you all had a good Thanksgiving.